Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades. Today I bring you a special episode of Rules for Retrogrades, a little bit out of the show's wheelhouse, but also in the show's wheelhouse. How is that? Because I'm going to be talking with a special guest, my friend and cousin, Jillian Curvers, about the topic, why are so many good Christians, especially Catholics, still single? And the answer has much to do with complex trauma, self-image, the neuroplasticity of the brain, which can help you or hurt you, how all this affects people's ability to effectively form relationships and families, and of course, anything that disrupts the abilities to have the ability of individual Christians to have effective families plays into what we know sort of the final mark of the final era of the world, given to us by the seer of Fatima, Sister Lucia dos Santos, has told us, you know, the final attack of Satan on the world is going to be on marriage and the family. And how do you attack marriage and the family? You start attacking people's views of dating. So the guest today is you, Jillian Curvers. Welcome to the show. You know a lot about this, and you're walking the walk and talking the talk. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
So well. And I know this because we talk all the time. But I'm just giving a little bit of a chance for folks who tend to gripe on the comments to gripe, because we were having a hard time getting this to go up live to Twitter as well. So you guys gripe away. The gripe line is open. Let us know if you can't hear Jill. I don't mean if you can only hear less than perfectly, but let us know. Now, Jill, why did you want to, you've become an expert at something called complex trauma. I don't want to get you off your order, because they're essentially 7 puzzle pieces to this question, why am I still single? Wholly attractive Catholics out there are finding it difficult to not be single. And it involves all these elements that you're going to be talking about today. Why did you decide to start going into all this as a Catholic woman?
Yeah, a lot of it is my own personal story. I think the question that I have as the title of this course, why am I still single? It was a question I started to ask myself, because I was getting asked it pretty frequently by, elders and others, just out of curiosity. And I started to realize that the answer is pretty complex, and I can't know specifically for every unique individual person. But for me, as I started to uncover all of the pieces, these 7 pieces to the puzzle emerged to me. And it's kind of the general structure of why people end up being still single when they really desire marriage and they're looking for that.
Yeah, like when we were doing the really, really intensely, spending many hours a week with that matchmaking service for a year and a half, we got 7 marriages out of it, and we were really happy with it.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it was dope. Me, Nick Stumphauser, Will Nolan, Mike Pentillo was helping at the end. 7 marriages, 14 people found each other, and it was great because matchmaking works in a way that dating doesn't. It's because you're getting people out of their own way. But we're spending less time on that in 2025. But I will say this: there are a lot of attractive, like high functioning practicing Catholics that know a lot and have their favorite devotions. Arguably, so many. And we'll just say, all I want is another faithful Catholic. And then we would pair them with them. And then some of the time they go off and they get married. But more often than not, there would be some snafu. And who knows what the cause really is. I wasn't the one getting together and going on dates and stuff. But there's something complex going on with personality. And from the Catholic conception of anthropology, personality is way more academic than folks assume, particularly under the auspices of modern psychology. But you're bringing in elements to your diagnosis of this, like why are people still single? And, you know, feel free to talk about how this has affected you, that have to do with some of the interesting positive elements of modern psychology, right?
Yeah, very much so. I think the first piece that came to me was this, what I think is truly the missing piece. Then I'll probably end up saying that a couple more times because there's three main pieces. But the first one was complex trauma. And at the time it was first introduced to me, it was called complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD. So there's been a lot of evolution in the way that this has been defined and described, but really it just means that you endured some kind of distress, something that made you feel not secure, not safe over an extended period of time, which might just be, and this varies by degree, so it could be relatively minor, it could be quite severe, but this is essentially just our childhood formation. So as we dive into our formation, each of us, of course, has a very unique way that we came about. We have our family of origins, our communities, friend groups, teachers, extended family, that whole thing. It all begins to form us. And so as I was unpacking my own history and my own issues, I started to see a lot of like, oh yes, this actually is a thing. And it's easy for us to gaslight ourselves because a lot of elements of complex trauma are quite subtle. It's not like oh, I went to war and I saw something horrific, or I survived a plane crash. Like, this is what's known as simple trauma. Complex trauma can be really subtle. It can be this feeling you can't quite put your finger on because maybe your father wasn't there. Maybe your parents got divorced. Maybe your parents were separated often, or your dad traveled for work. There's all these things that add to this feeling of dis-ease or insecurity. And so as I began to understand that, the next piece that came in was self-image. And we all think we know what that means. It's the image we hold of ourselves. But how is self-image formed? It's through our childhood formation. So those two things are inherently linked. And if you have an imperfect formation, as no doubt we all do, then our self-image becomes in some way, big or small, compromised. And then from there, it's like, well, if you want to understand self-image, of course you have to understand trauma, because we all have some to some degree. And from there, so if you want to understand complex trauma, you have to understand the brain. And I think the way these last pieces, self-image and the brain, came in was last year I had an interesting year of transformation. I left my job. I had a career in marketing, never really quite felt fulfilled, ended up leaving and pursuing coaching. So now I'm a personal development coach and a life coach. But that's where I studied all this stuff about the brain, and I started learning about self-image and what it really is. And then you're like, oh, okay, these three things are inherently connected. And it was like I had these three threads and God was just like braiding them before my eyes. And so I saw it and I was like, I have to create this. I think I remember when I either voice memoed you or called you or whatever, and was just like, I'm seeing this connection. And I was putting it in the context of my own life experience, which has been largely single, unmarried, not necessarily without somebody I was dating, but I've been single and I'm not that young. So I was like, well, why am I still single? And then I thought of those three pieces. I'm like, yeah, but there's more to it than that. So I just started to really flesh it out. And it's incredibly fascinating. And it was placed on my heart. I'm like, I've got to tell people this, because the more I started to coach and work with others, whether you're single or not, like, this was becoming a real thing. And I could see the impact of what people don't even know. They didn't have a language for what their feelings are, what is essentially just complex trauma. And I go into that really deeply, and I'm excited to share those pieces of the puzzle with everyone.
Yeah, so for the people out there listening to whom you are not cousin, you are single, you are a person who's got your life together. No, you're younger than me, so whatever that means.
Yes, much younger. You've
got your life together. You're practicing Catholic. You're serious about the faith. You're fit, whatever. And you're a good person. You're a fun person. You are a bright person. So there are a lot of people out there like this. And I came into contact with these people through, like I said before, that program. I wanted to get you on because for all the folks out there that maybe they went through our matchmaking program and didn't get married, like the 14 people that we got engaged or married in the first year and a half, or maybe they're just viewers of the show. Maybe they're just eligible Catholics that are asking, why am I still single? You know, I'm fit, I'm bright, I'm personable, I have my stuff together. You are offering a free course online, and it's going to be, I'm going to fly it. It's going to be through timothyjgordon.com, and that's beginning in mid-March. And I think it's going to be really cool. And we flew it for like an hour just as a test to see, this was 2 weeks ago, how many people would be interested in going to register for it. And in the first hour the first half hour, we got 20 people. So we took it off for a little bit. It's back up. Yeah, no, there's a lot of enthusiasm around this topic. And again, it's Catholic, but it's not just the eternal law that we're bequesting, it's the natural law. So if people are interested in this, Jill's class will begin in about a week on timothyjgordon.com. And the class is basically a deeper dive on each of these 7 puzzle pieces, 7 elements, whatever you want to call them. And you're going to go through the 7 in a preliminary way today.
Yeah, exactly. It starts next Tuesday, actually. And it dawned on me as yesterday was Ash Wednesday. Like, this is the perfect Lenten journey. You go deep, you're going to get real. You're going to start to like uncover some things that are uncomfortable. It's a perfect act of penance. But yeah, then we wrap up. It's over the course of 8 weeks. I think one of the weeks we take a break. I'll be out of town. But yeah, by the time Easter is here, it's the week after Easter, we wrap it up the end of April. You know, spring will be in full bloom. It's just the perfect time to dig into some of this stuff and answer these big questions and get yourself on the right track to really make good use of this season of singleness.
Sounds amazing. And remember, people who are watching out there, please help us reach our goal of 100,000 subscribers. Go click subscribe to the channel and like. And if you want to support, do so on Locals or Donor Box. If you want to donate, go to timothyjgordon.com. All right, so Jill, let's start on the first of the 7 elements, which is before we get into complex. I can't even read my notes because this light is so bright. The first one is self-image. Then we get to complex trauma. I find complex trauma really interesting. Complex trauma is interesting. I'll just say this before we go, because people are like, oh, I don't have PTSD. I didn't go to Iraq and have to carry like a pile of feet to like an army truck or something like that. And you're like, oh man, I better just dry up and quit complaining. But complex trauma is really interesting. Yeah. I'm excited to hear you talk about that on element 2. But start with self-image, which is affected by complex trauma.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I agree. The complex trauma piece is so fascinating. I used to always sort of like poke fun at psychology and thought it was like the soft science. But man, I am like basically a bona fide psychologist now. I just have gone really deep and learned a lot about it. And it's truly fascinating. And I think people will find it uniquely fascinating to themselves.
You're not claiming you have the accreditation or any of that. You've just done a deep dive on all this stuff. Yeah. I'm a bona fide fake psychologist. Yeah. Nietzsche said Dostoevsky was the only psychologist from whom he had anything to learn. You're a psychologist in that sense of someone who studied what's the psyche on your own. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Study humanity and myself. But yeah, self-image, that's the first piece. It's the view we hold of ourselves. There's a really remarkable experience I had a couple years back. I was just in this really low place. And I remember the thought popped into my head of, who do you think you are? Which is something that was said to me a lot as a child. And I remember standing there being like, I don't know. I don't know who I am. And I realized that's a big part of what self-image is. It's who do you think you are? It doesn't have to be said in a threatening way or a way to sort of condemn, but who do you think you are? This is what we're, through our formation, micro and macro, like micro in our families and communities, macro at large, like where did you grow up and what sort of media are you being fed?
What do you see out there? Like, did you grow up reading certain things and being exposed to certain realities? This forms who we are, who we think we are. And a lot of things can seep in there that aren't necessarily true. We end up with really firmly held beliefs, and these become essentially who we think we are and who others think they are. And I was actually struck by, there was an interview on the trailer that you showed for What a Woman Is. Am I allowed to talk in this area?
Sure.
I know your
of course.
documentary's coming
Of
out.
course. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know you released it so people know, but I'm super excited about What a Woman Is. But there was that red-pilled guy. He was being interviewed by a young woman, and he just looks at her and says, yeah, all women are going to cheat.
This
and
is Myron Gaines.
No, not all women will cheat.
Yeah, Myron Gaines and Fresh and Fit.
All women will cheat. And like, that's a lie. Not all women will cheat, but that's some firmly held belief that he has. And that's how we end up getting hardwired. And it really forms our image of ourselves and our image of others. And so it's important to, as we go deeper into the puzzle pieces, to take every thought captive. Not everything we think is dead on. So that's the first piece, self-image, understanding who we are. And then the next piece ties into it is how we get formed to think those things. Like, why do I think all women will cheat? Or why do I think all men will leave?
Yeah. Before we jump to complex trauma, I'd say this about Mr. Gaines. I was supposed to be part of a big battle royale 4x4 debate together with Chase Sovereign Bra on Twitter, Michael Knowles, and Mike Pentile versus Myron Gaines and some of the Red Pill guys. That never happened, and that's a shame. But yeah, I've heard other interview. I think it's part of the same interview where he's like, yeah, all women always do this. That's obviously not true. And they've fashioned this space where, or they'll have their red pill people shouting like white knight at me if I'm like, no, well, it's not true. I've been married like almost 20 years and my wife has never cheated on me. They're like, how do you know, bro? I'm like, all right, this convo is derailed. But he also says, like, the woman asked him, have you ever been in love? And he was like, with a woman? And I'm like, well, have you ever been in love with a woman or a dude? I've had my doubts, bro. But the funny thing is, he's like, he fashioned some ad hoc category. I think he said, I've had love for a woman, but I've never been in love. I'm like, no one knows what the hell that means. When people have a weird self-image, they'll do stuff like this. Well, they'll go off of proper categories and they'll start fashioning neologisms galore in order to be like, well, I don't want to sound like I've never been close. Instead of just saying that, he made up some new term that grammatically, syntagmatically doesn't work out for him. But I would just say this: when someone's got a way cattywampus self-image, I'm not saying mine is perfect. Everyone sometimes thinks they're cool and like they're walking through a movie scene when they're not. Everyone's done this at least once in their life. And people are like, you're not cool, dude. But when people are doing that all the time, they tend to fashion new vocabularies built around neologisms. And Myron Gaines does that in that exact thing you're talking about. But yeah, it's entirely appropriate. You start with self-image, and once again, you're doing an entire class on self-image that's going to dovetail as our fast version we're here today with complex trauma.
Yeah, and before I jump into the complex trauma piece, one more thing about that. What are you saying his name is? Myron, like Myron Gaines?
I think it's a stage name, like Myron Gaines in the weight room, or it's a very cheesy one if so. But it's Myron.
It makes me embarrassed to say it, but that gentleman, when he said that, like, you can see that beneath all of that is actually a self-image issue. It's not that he thinks every woman is going to cheat, or I've had love for a woman. What he's saying is, I have all these walls built up around my heart because I've been hurt before. And that's a far more vulnerable thing to say than to just like, oh yeah, women cheat and like I've had love, but I'll never allow myself to really love. That's a really sad, and you don't have to dig too deep to get to the place where like there's a really flawed self-image. He needs to realize that he's worthy of finding a woman who loves him. So I hope he knows that and comes to learn that. But
you can tell
no doubt he's suffered. Yeah, I'll tell him. I won't cheat on you, man. Complex trauma. No doubt he has some complex trauma, and I'm curious what his parents' relationship looked like.
I think he's a CIA brat. correct me if I'm wrong. The Tates, all of those red pill guys, disinfo alert, like, they're feminist disinfo, I think. But yeah, I think the Tates are CIA brats. He's like a FBI brat or something, NSA brat. I forget. I don't want to commit myself to saying something that's slanderous, but they all have ties to the intel community through their parents, or at least their parents are in it. So that's complex trauma right there, isn't it? Your dad's in the whatever.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. That
is some real complicated trauma.
You can't trust. True Lies.
Yeah,
Remember
really
that Schwarzenegger movie, True Lies?
Oh yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I think it's clear that there has to be complex trauma there, and we're not just talking about old Myron Gaines.
Yeah, no, that's precisely it. Personal trauma, complex trauma, how we're formed imperfectly. We're all descendants of the fall. We end up with some sort of imperfect formation. That is why we think those things that we do. So to use that example, all women are going to cheat. Let's say you think that, or all men are going to leave me. You think those things because something happened in your childhood that implanted that reality. And you just have formed this idea that this is always going to happen. But as we dig deeper into the brain and neuroscience, we realize that what we focus on expands. We have this reticular activating system in the base of our brain. So if we think something over and over again, we're going to see more of it. And then we're going to continue to get those same outcomes. So it feeds on itself. That's what makes complex trauma so insidious, is one, it feeds on itself, and it creates this environment where we only see the things we think of. And on top of that, it's insidious because it propagates itself generation to generation. Just look at, okay, well, if my parents maybe weren't quite what I needed them to be, well, look at their parents. What did they endure? And then your great-grandparents, you just go back all the way until you're just dealing with Adam and Eve. And we're all victims of original sin and original trauma. So this trauma just passes on and on. And it's really, we have to take it upon ourselves to look at ourselves deeply and say, okay, this is what's happened to me. This is how I deal with it. And I want to stop it so that I don't keep passing it on to my children and to theirs, and just becoming another puzzle piece in that bigger picture of, hurt people continuing to hurt people. Yeah,
the consequences of sin, original sin, are suffering, sickness, death. And the human anthropology, human nature was forever altered. We weren't fashioned by God to be concupiscent. Afterwards, we have this stain called concupiscence. And so families are messed up. And that's the alpha, and the omega of the negative omega, the bad omega, will wrap up with a final attack of Satan on the family, the way he initiated with Adam and Eve. Very interesting. But it's not to say that there aren't degrees of this. Like you meet people who relatively have their shit together and don't, they're still concupiscent. They still have the stain, and their all relationships, spousal and offspring, wellspring, will suffer from whatever imperfections you had in your family of origin, compounded by two, or at least two, because there are two people part of it. But some seem to thrive, most don't. We're talking to everyone now. Everyone's got complex trauma, and that means every relationship has algorithmic complex trauma that's exponential in some way, when you get the trauma of some girl and some guy together. Is that what you're talking about here?
Yeah, and we go deep into a couple things. Attachment theory is really, really interesting. John Bowlby was a psychiatrist from England, and I think he sort of came around in the 1940s, but really interesting theory around attachment. He was kind of laughed out of the psychological association at the time, because people just thought, he was basically saying, if you don't have proper attachment to your mother, specifically your mother, in early childhood, the first couple years, but really the first few months, which at that time, infants were sort of ripped from their families. If you had to go to hospital, they dropped you off at hospital, and your parents left because they didn't want to create clingy children. But you end up with all these like really sad, lonely kids, and they were depressed and fell into lives of either poverty or crime. But yeah, you get into this reality of how we form attachments in our youth will affect us as we grow up and have relationships. If you had a parent you couldn't trust, and you probably don't know this because this is pre-memory, so it all goes into your subconscious brain. But if you didn't feel like you could trust your parent, your mother or your father, you go out into a relationship and you're either like super clingy and, like just attached and insecure, looking for that affirmation, like you're going to be there, right? You're going to be there. Or you build up walls and you have what's known as avoidant attachment style. And you don't get close and everything's just like, gosh, I feel like I know you, but only up into the point where we like talk about Seinfeld, and then I don't really get to know the real you. And that's another effect of having an insecure attachment style. So we go into that, we go into the nature of affirmation and how without affirmation being given to you by a parent, by a primary caregiver, you can't give it to yourself. So many people are out there trying to affirm themselves through, like in the red pill movement, like just getting gains or whatever, getting ripped.
Get gains.
But you're like broken on the inside.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to admire these gains. It's like, why? I do.
Gains.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to keep reminding people to go to timothyjgordon.com. This class is actually going to be free starting in 5 days, with Jill going deep on each of these 7 in over the course of 7 classes. So starting out with self-image effects is the first puzzle piece of why otherwise eligible people are still single. Now we're talking about what affected self-image, which is complex trauma, CPTSD. I was talking to another Catholic friend, another Catholic influencer, and he was like, oh, I've been going deep on CPTSD. And I was like, is that complex trauma? Because that's funny. I have been too, through my cousin Jill. And he had been. Like, so again, you say it's different from PTSD, which most people don't assume they have, because that's like one big event, like a plane crash or a horrific gardening accident or whatever. You went to war or something. This is like a lot of people have it who were maybe not loved properly by think of the generations above us and all the people walking around with complex trauma. I mean, boomers are like, you're out of the house when you're 18. And I'm not saying particular boomers, just they're known for saying you're out of the house when you're 18, but I still want to meddle in your lives after that. I don't want to help or whatever, but yeah, I don't know. I think that a lot of people are, crying out for this. And by the way, I think it's particularly good to have, of the 20 people that first registered for it, your course, if it's to whatever extent that it's representative, a lot of them were young women. And remember, I would urge people to remember that it's good to have a woman teaching women. Particularly, the Bible says it's good to have an older woman teaching younger women how to really love their husbands. This is kind of situation B, like we all want to get husbands, and I'm trying to show you how it's not too late, and here are probably the elements that you're not hearing in other aspects of, it's like a support group.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point to mention. Did I lose you? No,
I'm here. Yeah, I'm all good. I just, the complex trauma stuff's so interesting. I didn't know if you want to rush through it or just go on to the brain, what complex trauma does to brain science. It's kind of astounding. I mean, like, why am I a hypochondriac? It has to do with complex trauma, I guarantee you.
Jill, just one second.
What'd you say?
I think we might have lost Jill, so just 1 second.
Did we lose you,
Yeah, I'm going
Jill?
to click to join her again.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm back on. Or you pop back up. But yeah, there was a moment when the feed.
There we go.
Yeah, so I think they just lost video, but audio's there.
Yeah, there you go.
Audio was there the whole time.
Yeah. What I will say about, or continue to say about complex trauma is we'll go deeper into this in the course, but there's 4 causes. And some of it will be fairly obvious, like if you've dealt with any kind of abuse, Neglect, I will say this though, neglect is not, it's broader than what you think. So you might have suffered some form of neglect without realizing. It's like, oh, I didn't get like locked in a cage in the basement. But this is kind of like an old way of thinking about trauma. Like, oh, it's just having like cigarettes put out in my like skin. It's like, no, there's much more to it. The abandonment part, like if you suffered divorce, that's abandonment. So if you have divorced parents, like that's like complex trauma.
Right.
And then the final piece, the fourth, is really, really subtle, but these are the ones that tend to affect people the most. And it's one of these 12 needs not being met. We have all these emotional needs that go far beyond having a roof over our head, having clothes on our back, and having food on the table. We need to be respected, to be feel like we're valued, like we belong. And if all of these little things are subtly being cut down, like maybe somebody, you try to tell a joke and your parent cuts you off or tells you it was stupid. That sounds really silly, but when you're 4 years old or 5 years old, these things like really hurt. And if it hurt you, it's important and it matters to you to get to the bottom of what some of these bigger themes in your life are, so you can work through them, process that, and become a whole person, so you can go out there and meet someone without having all this, like what we used to call baggage. Baggage is just complex trauma or some form of trauma that we suffered as in our childhood that just we carry along.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I still say baggage, but it's an inability to adequate your environment and adapt. I mean, like I even note, like I spend so much time with my kids. We homeschool, we do stuff together after homeschool. We'll watch a movie, we'll pray together, and we'll, have dinner, watch a movie at night. Half the time we're falling asleep, all of us out there on the couch. And then if everyone's like, oh man, we did that a few nights in a row, we're going to go back to our rooms. Like I'm a big kid. This has to be complex trauma. I'm like disappointed. Mm-hmm. My like 13-year-old will be like, I'm going to go sleep in my room tonight after the movie today. Dad, I'll be like, that's cool. And I'll be sitting there like, oh man, that's definitely complex trauma. I'm so close with people I'm close with. I'm close with, but you can't. There's always the temptation with self-image as complex trauma adheres to it to sort of make your weakness a strength, a la Michael Gary Scott. Yeah. And it's like, no, that's good. It's good to be close to your, it's good to hang out and spend lots of time, but there's some miss there in my mind, there's some miss in, but I've just been trying to be more, open with people, as we've talked more about the personality stuff, which this isn't the first show we've talked about personality. So I'm like, people say, oh, you think you're perfect, like a judgmental trat. I'm like, no, well, I'm not really a closed book. I'm kind of an open book. So I don't mind this, particularly as the documentary gets ready to come out. It's like, yeah, my best friend is my wife. People all know we're coaches. We're marriage coaches. That's also on timothyjgordon.com. We coach people 2 by 2. And sometimes people will just be like, well, what do you guys struggle with? We're like, it's a great question. We had a great coaching session the other day where someone asked and they're like, oh, wow. Like Tim and Steph, you guys are the coaches. A lot of people look up to the kind of relationship you have. Where do you miss? And I'm like, it's definitely from complex trauma that I bring, that she brings, and then some sort of perfect storm with some of the elements of it. Certain things that you do from childhood that are off or cattywampus are less of a big deal than other things. And you because of concupiscence, you notice them less. Yeah, no, and I should add this too, like complex trauma or rather singleness is not the only result of complex trauma. Like no doubt a lot of married people and a lot of people who are in different states of life have complex trauma. And if you don't heal it before, you come together and you might have a lot of blow up situations. If you haven't, if you're hitting on the raw spots, or maybe you come together and you form like a codependency. Either way, like it's really important to figure this stuff out, and you'll start to realize like, yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense. I do X because of, Y, like this happened to me. And now I'm coping with it with this
precisely, this what makes exactly the right kind of sense for why I would do this to cover up this or to soothe that part of me. So yeah, it will come with us, and it's just very important to figure out what your unique story is and get to the root of it.
Right. Exactly. So then you go into brain and then neuroscience?
Yeah, the brain is really interesting. It's like we have this amazing gift from God. We have this like magnificent like resource center that's like our epicenter of thoughts and memories, and we can imagine things we don't, just think about, like if you think about eating a lemon, like your mouth will start to water. There's not a lemon in sight, but like that's the power of the brain. And so it's by design in a way that it becomes disordered. So the end result of these three things, like understanding self-image, means you got to understand your upbringing and your trauma, and then you have to understand how the brain works. And the culmination of all this, what we end up being up against is we're trying to change an autopilot program. We get hardwired in our brain, like by design, it's very, very plastic, very moldable when we're young. So if, let's just say you witness the sort of thing that makes you think men will always leave or women will always cheat or parents just don't care, that gets hardwired in your brain along with all the other thoughts about yourself. And so what we're up against is trying to change an autopilot program that's been programmed wrong.
Right.
And then that's where we get to the neuroscience part, is you can realize that there's a lot of positivity in this, because yes, the brain is by design meant to be changeable. That means we can change it. And the neuroscience part is really interesting, just getting into how we can fix it, how we can, using different techniques, a lot of cognitive behavioral work through repetition and words, but you just have neuro disruption. Figure out, like, I got to stop the way that I've been thinking, and it really does go back to the thoughts. That's why I really highly suggest working with a coach. Like you and Steph are great. In my coaching practice, I work with people and I'll hear them say the things they don't know that they're thinking, right? Because 95% of our thoughts are subconscious. They're just below the surface. We're acting out of those places, but we don't even know that we're thinking them, because they're not up in they're not in like our frontal lobe coming out of this like deep creative part of us. It's this under the surface, hardwired childhood trauma part of us that's just like, oh, I'm not really worth it. And then people will come to me and I'll hear them speak and they'll say these things that are like clearly limiting beliefs they hold of themselves or hold of others. And so you can take those thoughts captive, start to work on what's beneath it, and then get to a place where you can kind of re-script it. And, for Mr. Gaines, it's like, what can we start to write and script out so that you don't think all women cheat? Maybe it's like, I can learn to trust women, or I know that some women are good, and you just get to this place where you can repeat that and write it and recite it and just bring yourself to better understanding around the truth. But that takes some really deep work. So the neuroscience part is interesting, but to me, it gives a lot of hope. It's like complex trauma is not the end of anyone's story. It's just a piece of how we got to where we are. And then you can take the reins and really unite what you know is good for you with your highest good, with what's God's plan and purpose for your life, and get to a place where you're really reframing those negative subconscious thoughts.
How effective is the re-scripting? I read a book called Brain Lock, and it's kind of about the re-scripting, but it's really hard to do, particularly for this book is about people with obsessive compulsive, and it's like the hardest thing. It's like the hardest lift they ever had to do. Do you find this effective? I mean, have you done this on your own with self-image and brain science in yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, every day I have like a prayer routine that involves some re-scripting. And it's just announcing in the name of Jesus certain things that I know to be true. And it helps helps you to start to believe the things that you didn't know you didn't believe before, that you are worthy, that you are good. There's nothing that we can do that diminishes our worth. And I think we know that, like, what's next? You're just going to hold up like a Jesus loves you sign. It's like, well, sure, but we're acting out of a place of not knowing some of this stuff, and you can prove it. And we'll get into this in number 5, what is love? But we think we know what love is, but then we're doing all these things that prove that we don't really love ourselves or love others. And so, yeah, the rescripting, it does work. And I'll tell you this factoid, because this was so remarkable to me when I learned it about the brain specifically. But the longer that we've had a thought has existed in our minds, or the more intensely that we've thought it due to trauma, like let's say you endure something and you're just like, because of this, I'm just disgusting, I'm bad. The myelin sheath between those neural pathways becomes thickened. It's like literally like hardens, and you can't move out of that frame of thinking without disrupting it. It's just literally hardwired, hard-coded into the brain. And I can imagine that's true with obsessive compulsive. You're just like, you don't know how not to do it. It's subconscious. It's just a part of your natural behavior system. But it takes disrupting that. And for something like that, it might require more than just rescripting, but longer term work to break out of that pathway. It's really the only way. You've got to get your brain to stop thinking that way.
Yeah. That's unbelievable. So how are you distinguishing between brain and neuroscience?
Yeah, the distinction there is really that for me, the brain is how we get hardwired, and getting into the neuroscience, it's how the brain how we can use our brain for our own good, and we can start to rewire it using different techniques. But really, like, those two things are inherently linked. It's the brain, and like the different parts of it. We'll go into the different parts of the brain, how it forms. Like, our brains aren't fully formed until we're like 30. So you can imagine, like, when you're young, when you're making bad decisions, a lot of that's just sort of by design. We're not quite mature. But yeah, the neuroscience piece, number 4, is really about the work that you can do and start to employ in your own lives to reframe and to break out of some of those old thought patterns.
Right. What, I mean, I look at it this way, like if you can get into the bad mental habits, you can get out of them. But it's not a zero sum. Like, it's really hard. It's harder to get out of them than to get into them. Harder to build virtue than vice.
Yep. Yeah, I would point to St. Paul in, I think it's 1 Corinthians, possibly 2nd. But take every thought captive. Like, you really can, and it becomes a part of your daily protocol. It's like when you have a thought, or let's say you start to think about, oh, am I getting a headache? You have to stop yourself and be like, okay, I'm thinking that. Now, how do I stop myself from going down that path? Because maybe like that thought makes you feel something, right? Because our thoughts prompt feelings. Maybe that feeling is anxiety. Oh no, I can't get a migraine today. I've got to go live on the show. And so now you're kind of spinning in anxiety. And that feeling then becomes whatever you're about to do or not do, or maybe you have reactions like, okay, when I'm anxious, now I start pacing, and now I start maybe just getting distracted. I'm no longer focused on my work, but I'm just, spiraling in a way. And then what happens? What's the outcome of you spiraling? Okay, I don't go live on my show. I don't get anything done. And you don't even really have the headache. You just thought you were getting one. And so you can see how your thoughts lead all the way to that negative outcome of like ruining your day, losing all of your day and your time, versus if you can take that thought captive and be like, well, how can I reframe that thinking? Let's say I get a migraine. Having a headache won't be so bad. Even just that thought gives you a little bit more peace. Like, oh yeah, I'll just get through it. I can work through my day regardless of how how I feel in my, physical head. And that gives you a little bit more peace. You're not getting the anxiety. So you can really start to reframe the thought and realize that it's the thought that leads to the outcome. It's not the action that leads to the outcome. And this is a really great technique, because women tend, or more likely to be called emotionally unstable or not have the command of their minds. Mind management is an incredible tool. It's a big part of neuroscience, of recognizing that every thought that comes into your head doesn't have to spiral into some negative thought pattern or some negative emotional response. Because when we're in that place of anxiety or worry or fear, those feelings are what lead us to do things or not do things or react in a negative way. And then, of course, we end up getting outcomes that we don't want.
Yeah, I forget the psychologist lady's name, but she says, let an intrusive thought for OCD people like wash over you. The thought, exactly like you just said, Jill, the thought doesn't have to lead to all of the emotions and then actions. And again, this is stuff that people might not have thought would be prompted preliminarily by the topic of why am I still single? I mean, look how much of a deep dive this is on neuroscience and blocking out, negative effects of negative thinking that come from usually our childhood. I mean, what I'm really interested in, fascinated by, is the negative thought, intrusive thoughts about the body and about things like, oh, am I getting a migraine, that actually lead to not a fake migraine, but a real migraine. And, the term is psychosomatic. People think it means a fake headache where you're just lying. No, the brain is so powerful. If you're worried about it enough, and this is truer with certain organs than others, but you can actually give yourself the headache by worrying about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, an undisciplined mind is filled with worries and fears and anxieties. And then that actually leads to degeneration, not just of the mind itself, but of the body. You can think yourself illness. And they even show complex trauma causes physical illness. I mean, no doubt it leads to a lot of things like NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, or borderline, ADHD, but also a lot of, I was telling you a lot about this 8-part series on the gut microbiome, just total side topic that I'm interested in. But trauma was one of the 8 courses or one of the 8 classes, because trauma causes disruption of the gut. So we're very, very integrated. And if we dealt with something difficult emotionally and we didn't process it, or we just shoved it aside because that was easier, we might have like literal physical effects due to that. So it really becomes like, it's not just for the sake of your relationships and your future marriage, but man, you want your body to be healthy and whole.
Right. Amen. All right. So the fifth puzzle piece, getting to understanding love, you're bringing around the neuroscience and the brain science and the complex trauma to, getting back on the right track. And it's picking up the titular search or quest, which is for love, for romantic love.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of go deep, and then we take a little break so everyone can process. I can go on this little trip that I'm going on. We come back and we get into love, which this was something I was just studying naturally on my own, thinking about, well, what is love? Because like I said, this whole course was created. This is me doing my own personal work and then realizing there's a broader story here. There's something I can share with others where they can go through the same journey, hopefully, and get to the bottom of their unique story. But I realized in my own life, I don't think I've been doing love right. I think I've always thought of it as something different. And it ended up, for me, it was a lot of maybe enablement, and I think my deep subconscious thoughts were, I have to earn people's love. I have to be XYZ something to make them either stay with me or want to be around me. And again, that's a lie. That's part of what I re-script. But I go deep on this chapter here into what love really is and what it really is not. And I look to Jesus in the Gospels to show us, because, he is love itself, right? So anything he says or does or teaches us is love. And he has really perfectly boundaried love. I think a lot about how he lets people walk away from him. Earlier this week, the gospel was in Mark of the rich young man. I love that. You know, here's this guy, Jesus says to him, as he says to many others, come follow me. And he's sad because he's got a lot of stuff. So he goes away, and Jesus doesn't go chasing him down, you know, so he recognizes and he looked to him, and what he says, he loved him. He did. He loved him. He invited him to come, and this man didn't want to. So Jesus let him reject him. So we have to realize that we have to let people reject us sometimes. You know, not everyone's going to be on board with who we are or who we become, because that's what self-image work is. Like, I'm becoming, God willing, a holy person, holier person. I might lose friends along the way. Maybe they're not on board. So, like, let them walk away. We don't have to enable and earn people's love if they're maybe using us or abusing us. So this allows people that freedom to recognize, gosh, have I been loving myself and others correctly? Have I been like doing this whole thing wrong? Maybe part of my issue is really just the way that I approach love and loving myself.
Yeah, that's great. That's really important. And I would imagine that the re-scripting that's happening in the brain, which is entirely interior and self-oriented, has some actions that are associated with it, because love is, you know, when we're saying we want to give people love out in the world, it means that we actually have to take, I guess, after re-scripting like a negative self-image or something like that, now it's going to have drastically different outcome, like an input-output machine. It's going to be drastically different what we're capable of giving to other people from once we're actually looking at ourselves properly.
Yeah, precisely. And you will see as you start to love yourself and you're treating yourself as you're meant to be, you will naturally treat other people, and you will require them to treat you that way too. So for those who have maybe struggled with finding a friend or a romantic partner, I hate using the word partner, but it's the only gender neutral thing I could come up with. But yeah, you might have expectations where it's like, oh, I've just got to do all the work for them, or I can't expect them to do this or that for me. You'll start to see, like, as you hold yourself to account, you will hold them to account too. And it's a really beautiful way to start to grow and to encourage and really ask people to come up to your level rather than you coming down to their level and just putting up with bad behavior.
Yeah, so you mean holding others accountable, like, whatever, I'm lovable and huggable, so I can actually ask you this kind of thing?
Yeah, no, I think in my own experience of just recognizing, like, oh, I'm not getting what I need from this person, rather than feeling like, oh, I'm not worth bringing this to that person. Like, who am I to ask him to do this for me? Or who am I to expect that he would give me a call, on this day or that day or whatever? Just realize, like, yeah, no, my needs matter. And having that image of yourself that if it matters to you, that it's important. And even if it feels silly, that you're able to go to your person and let them know, like, this is what I need from you. That open communication, it's a really beautiful thing. And I think for a lot of people who struggle with their own self-image, they don't feel like that they have the right to go to somebody and really share their heart and be vulnerable. But true love really is vulnerable. It's openness, and it's giving yourself to another and inviting them to be there for you in the ways that they should, want to be.
The categories are tough though, right? How do you separate this, distinguish it conceptually from, like, codependence? It's tricky.
Yeah, I mean, this is going deep and figuring out, like, what your unique story is. And, like I said, we'll talk about attachment style and affirmation and boundaries and all those components. But yeah, you can start to think of, like, am I in a place where I'm feeling secure? Or am I still acting out of that place of, like, codependency? I've never struggled with the anxious side of things where I'm, like, needy. I struggle more with the, like, I never expected anyone to do anything for me. And I'm realizing from my perspective that it's the self-image that I'm trying to recreate is somebody who is confident and secure to ask people for what I need rather than to assume that my needs don't matter. So it's kind of like you figure out what your attachment style is and what you're struggling against, like what you hit up against.
That's interesting. Okay, so the 6th and 7th pieces of the puzzle are self-knowledge and self-maximization, respectively. How can you sort of bring us around to those things? And again, go to timothyjgordon.com. This class is up for free right now, 7-week class with Jill, and it's, I think, going to be phenomenal and just way different. Why am I still single? Totally different set of subtopics than people might assume a class like this would entail. You can go get that class for free right now with Jill, who's a personal coach on things that are related to this. Self-knowledge and self-maximization. Explain those two concluding elements.
Yeah, these ones are both really fun. Well, the 7th one is, I think, probably more fun than 6, but self-knowledge is, I mean, it's fundamental to self-improvement. So getting to know yourself and getting to know God, recognizing that God is always pursuing you. If you're in this season of singleness, you might feel all alone, but recognizing that you're never alone. God is always pursuing you, and you're in this unique season of your life where you have an opportunity to really answer his call and be close with him. So there's a lot of powerful steps to take to grow in your spiritual formation, do that deep interior work that leads to self-improvement, knowing that you can't become holier if you're not becoming whole. You have to understand the whole part, all the parts of your life, and really start to build that interior strength. And yeah, transform from the inside out. And that leads to the final class number 7, self-maximization. This is fun. I think this class is going to be really cool. This is more of the isn't this whole thing about this, like the tips and tricks? This is really about how to master and make great use of this season of singleness. So you've done all the hard work. You've gone deep on trauma. You figured out a lot of stuff. You're in it, and you want to work toward wholeness. Now it's like, how do we improve not just on the inside, but on the outside too? Like, what are some things that I can do that really transform and bring that, that beauty from the inside on the outside as well? And that might mean things like physical improvements, fitness, getting gains, lifting weights, toning up, some appearance improvements, makeup, skincare, hygiene, if men are struggling with fashion and personal style, elements like that. But really just bringing the whole picture together. We even go into some things you wouldn't really expect around like your personal environment, right? Like if you're hosting friends over at your place, like, do you have nice decor? Do you need to update your old lamps you've had since college? Do you have that classic old leather black couch? Get those replaced.
Anything pleather, replace.
Pleather pants, especially.
Anything pleather, get rid of right away.
And
yeah,
especially
get rid of the
pants.
pleather.
Especially pants. Yeah.
Yeah. And just skilling up. Take this time to really skill up around dating. This is really near and dear to my heart. This is actually where a lot of this started. I was thinking about a year ago, I had all these realizations around dating and how it's so hard to do it because everyone's on a different page. We almost need a unified plan of how to do it. And so we'll go into that. Men, do you know how to ask a woman out? Women, do you know how to politely say no thank you? There's all these things we lean a little heavily on the ghosting in our modern times, modern culture, rather than just being polite and learning how to communicate not just with our voice, but through our tonality and through the way we present ourselves and the way that we dress and style. So all these things are really important to maximizing and becoming the best person and ultimately the person you were created to be.
Sounds amazing. So people out there, if you're interested in this, the 7 puzzle pieces of why am I still single? Lifestyle personal coach Jillian Curvers is saying the elements are self-image, complex trauma, brain, neuroscience, understanding love, self-knowledge, self-maximization in a 7-week course, which begins next week on timothyjgordon.com. It's absolutely free to you. and should be dynamite. Did you have any closing thoughts, Joe? This is good stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm one, just really grateful to get to chat with your audience and your community. I know they're really awesome people, and over the years I've met some of them. So if you're single, or if you know someone who's single, or even if you're not, you're just curious about this topic, a lot of it will apply to people who are struggling in other areas, but it's a great way to really fully understand yourself and understand the big picture. I use that, the metaphor of like the puzzle pieces, because really as these pieces come together, the final image will be unique to you, but everyone has their own story, and these are like the 7 components that just stood out to me in my own, my new practice and my whole life. This is like the culmination of, in a way, my own life story. And it's like, I feel like I finally cracked the nut. I'm like, I got to tell people this so that they can, and if it helps just one person out there, that's good for me.
Excellent. People out there, like this video, subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in this topic, then you really should be. Why am I still single? You heard it's a lot deeper than maybe just the self-maximization element, which just means, get gains and apply more makeup or something. Then go to timothyjgordon.com, prepare for this. Jill, thanks for appearing today. This was a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but I think really, really good stuff. I'm fascinated by complex trauma, and I think people out there are too. So go to the class and see what you can get out of it. It's absolutely free to you parish orphans and retrogrades. Any parting thoughts, Joe? Are you good?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on, and I'm grateful to work with some people the coming weeks. So looking forward to it very much.
Cool. God bless you all. Jazz Volt.
Yo, I'm still on the phone.
Yeah, I'll take you.